Okay, getting back to the I guess we'll call the radical ideas of the Ralbag that we saw last week, or just the other day. The Ralbag was learning that somehow HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in order to facilitate free will taking place, he kind of like closes his eyes to the decisions that you make so that you are able to make a free will decision in your life. Meaning everybody else learns that Hashem knows everything and he's seeing everything and he's aware of everything. The fact that you can't understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows everything and yet you have free will, that's our problem because our mind is very finite. We can't see everything. The Ralbag comes along and he says, why do you have to go that far? Let's make it simple. He's trying to simplify everything. And the simplification is, Hashem does know everything, but he limited himself in the world of free will because if he wouldn't, then there would be no free will. Because the Ralbag's axiom that he's working with is that if in fact Hashem knows everything that's going to happen, then it's impossible that a person would ever have free will, because then if Hashem knows what's going to happen, it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is controlling what's going to take place. And therefore the fact that you look like you're doing something that's free will, it's not true. Hashem already decided what's going to happen in your life. So in order to avoid or to get around that problem that the Ralbag has, the Ralbag says, what do we say then? We say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu just limits himself. So if you say that, and this is what Rabbi Tatz is going to speak about today, we're going to run into a wall with the concept that we have of who Hashem and of what Hashem really is.
This is very confusing to me, because if you're letting a person make a decision, just because he already knows what the decision is going to be, he's not making the decision. It's like a roulette table. I know it's going to hit on a number. I'm not controlling it, but God knows what number it's going to fall on. He's not pushing the wheel so it's going to fall on that number.
Right.
He knows.
Okay. So again, you are very happy then with the commentary and the opinion of the Rivash, because that's really that's what we said from the opinion for the Ralbag has in his mind that if you say that Hashem knows everything that's going to happen, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is pushing everything to happen the way that he knows it's going to happen.
He's not pushing it. He knows that how the decision is going to
But again,
I'm not pushing it.
You're right.
I'm going to give you a choice: go right or go left. It's your choice. But if I was Hashem, I know what choice to make.
Right.
I'm not
So
pushing you
again,
this way or that way.
so you are correct in the other opinions that we've had so far. That's more or less the way that they understand it. The Ralbag, for some reason, understands that you can't say that. That you can't say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows exactly what's going to happen, and he is not in control of what is going to take place. If he knows, so then the reason that he knows is because he's pushing it to happen in such a way. If he doesn't know, which is what the Ralbag is suggesting over here, if he doesn't know, so then that means that he's kind of concealing his vision from seeing what's going on, in order to facilitate the laws of nature or the foundation of our existence, which is you are a creature of free will. Otherwise, like we said before, there's no reward and there's no punishment. I shouldn't get rewarded for doing the right thing if I don't have free will, and I shouldn't get punished for doing the wrong thing if I don't have free will. And since that the whole Torah itself is based upon this idea of reward and of punishment, when you do what's right, you get rewarded, and when you do what's wrong, you get punished, then it must be that there's free will, says the Ralbag. How can there be free will if Hashem knows everything? Elamai, it must be he doesn't know everything. Hashem doesn't know everything, so then we're going to run into an issue as Rabbi Tatz is going to explain. So let's see what he says. So first of all, he says that there are in mystical explanations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Kabbalah, Kabbalistic explanations of the way that Hashem created the world and the way that he runs the world, there is something that is called tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means that Hashem, exactly how we would explain it, but Hashem somewhat, he restricts or constricts, he contracts himself to allow, for example, if Hashem is all-powerful and is all-knowing and all of existence, And before there was a physical world, there was only the spiritual world that Hashem was existing in. So then how could you create a physical world when all that there is around here is something that is spiritual? So therefore, in Kabbalah, in the Kabbalistic ideas, Hashem contracts of himself to leave like a space, so to speak, that allows for the physical world to be created. So it's a lofty concept. If you don't understand it, don't let it bother you. It's a lofty concept that somehow HaKadosh Baruch Hu, somehow Hashem can do whatever he wants. He like opens up a space which allows physical world to be built. Something of that nature. Now, if that's the case, so then why is it so hard to understand what the Ralbag is saying? The Ralbag is saying that, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't really contract himself to make the physical world. Hashem was still completely all-powerful and omniscient, omnipotent, of course. He just, in order to create a physical world, he had to do something that was like holding back on himself from the spirituality to allow the physicality to come into this world. So why don't we say the same thing over here? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be free will. There needs to be free will. Hashem, of course, he has Yedi. He knows in general everything's going to happen in this world. But in order to allow you to have free will, he has to contract of himself, to conceal himself, so to speak, in order to allow a person to have free will. Because the Ralbag learns that if Hashem would know everything that's going to happen, that means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had already decided before it happened what's going to happen. That is his hanacha, what we call that is his theory. And therefore, says Rabbi Tatz, if that's the case, so then it's not so hard to understand what the Ralbag is saying. It's maybe not such a radical idea. It means, as he writes over here, that a central aspect of the interaction between us and Hashem is to allow our free will to operate. In that area, we may say that Hashem has limited his knowledge of our future choices so that we are free to choose. So that's what we'll say. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's the one that's in control. So Hashem is saying, in order that I could allow you to have free will, I am going to control my mind from not knowing what's going to take place in the future in order that you can make a decision right now, and it's totally unaffected by me, says Hashem. So he withholds his knowledge from the zone of human free will to allow that zone a meaningful existence. So which is a fascinating idea. If you think about it, that means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that he so badly wants there to be free will in this world, the only way that he can do it, he has no choice, so to speak. He put himself into a corner over here, which is part of the issue that we're going to have, that he must block his vision, he must contract his knowledge, he must seal off his eyes from seeing what's going on in order that you can have free will.
But if I know, I'm not God, but if I know you well,
yes,
and I ask you the decision about something, I know what you're going to do because I know you.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that have anything to do with you doing it. It just happened that I know you.
right.
So I don't know what the conflict is.
Right. So again, many of the Rishonim, many of the commentators that we saw already, and we will see, will agree with the statement that you're making. The Ralbag doesn't agree that could happen, and therefore he's saying the way he is. However, and this is the point of contention, there's many later authorities that disagree strongly with the Ralbag, and that's number one, the Rivash that we saw already, and the Akedah that we're going to see coming up. And their argument on the Ralbag is that he's deviating from the basic, fundamental, and foundations of the Rambam. And the Rambam holds that Hashem has full foreknowledge of what you're going to do. And yet you have full abilities to make a free will decision. And those two things are not a contradiction because it's only in our mind that we cannot understand what that means. But in the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything makes sense. Even when you learn like the Rivash or of Saadia Gaon, he's learning over there that although that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what you're going to choose in the future, it's only because he knows everything. So he's watching the future right now and he sees what decision you're going to make. He didn't enforce that decision. He didn't push that decision on you. You had free will to choose. He happens to know right now exactly what you're choosing tomorrow, or next week, or in 5 years. He already knows. So therefore, the Ralbag is abandoning the basic tenet of our faith in BECHIRA, free will, and Hashem's foreknowledge when he goes along with this. And he just brings down parenthetically over, you should understand that the Rivash, he suggests that maybe one of the reasons the Ralbag was distorted in his thinking is because he had contact with secular philosophical material, which is just a very important point to put on the record over here. If you are trying to figure out HaKadosh Baruch Hu from a very philosophical point of view, and you're relying upon secular philosophers to enlighten you about how Hashem is working, well, they don't know the secrets of the Torah, and therefore they're going to only come up with whatever appears to them to be the reality. So therefore they could write dissertations, philosophical, theological dissertations, existential dissertations about how God and his foreknowledge and the free will works, but it's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in mind, it's not what the Torah has in mind. And therefore the Rivash criticizes the Ralbag over here, and he says that if you would not have had exposure to secular philosophical works, you never would have said such a thing that you're saying. Because if you think about it, says the Rivash, you're saying something that limits HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all-knowing. You're saying, no, he's not. Because Hashem doesn't know what you're going to choose. We said every other opinion that we say, he does know what you're going to choose. But you also have free will. And you're going to have to come to grips with that. You don't know what you're going to choose. Hashem knows what you're going to choose because he already sees in the future what's going to be. He sees right now what's going to be in the future. And therefore the Ralbag is a mystery in their minds. And he goes to town over here and he says, it's inappropriate to place limits on Hashem's knowledge. That's really what he's saying. The Ralbag is placing limits on Hashem's knowledge. In addition, he argues that doing so leads to an unacceptable conclusion. We're going to get to a place that we don't want to go to, and that is, if Hashem lacks the knowledge of an event before it occurs, and he gains that knowledge only later when the event occurs, so then Hashem must have changed in some way. Meaning what? Hashem is all-knowing. Now you're telling me he's not all-knowing. So what does that mean? That means right now he doesn't know what you're going to choose. Tomorrow when you choose it, Hashem knows. So then he's not all-knowing. So that means the God that we understand as being the God of Das, of all knowledge, of all awareness, total knowledge of everything that's going to happen in the world. So the Ralbag is saying, well, Hashem kind of changed in order to facilitate that there should be free will. So Hashem changes himself? He changes his reality. Again, once you go down this path, says the Rivash and others, you're going into a very dangerous place of philosophy that's not really going to work. And therefore, it would imply that this would be an offensive affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem had to change himself in order to allow free will? The Rambam doesn't say that. The Rivash doesn't say that. Rabbi Yagon doesn't say that. They say, whatever you'll understand, you'll understand. But Hashem is Hashem. He's constant. He is, he was, he always will be. He's a constant in this world. He is the Rambam calls elsewhere. He's the Davar HaNimsa. He is the thing that is always found. Now you want to tell me, according to the Ralbag, he's changing his ways? Hashem was one thing, then he changed himself around to be able to make free will? Why would Hashem do such a thing? He's perfect. He doesn't have to change himself to make free will a reality. Rather, we have to wrap our heads around the idea that Hashem knows everything, Hashem is all-powerful, he knows what we're going to do, but we have free will. So like the Rambam says, you just can't understand. It's too vast of an idea for the human brain to understand. The Rivash says, you could understand it. Hashem knows everything. So he knows what you're going to choose. He knows today what you're going to choose tomorrow. So therefore, today, he already knows what your choice was. He knows it all. But tomorrow, you're going to choose it. And that, he would say, that's not a contradiction. So now, the Rav Tatz, he ends off with this idea, and he says, if one were to postulate that Hashem lacks the knowledge of an event both before and after the event, which means that this is the way that we could say that Hashem didn't have to change himself. Meaning Hashem really was Hashem's existence is all powerful, all knowing. He knows it all. But Hashem said, I have to change myself in order to allow the advent of free will to come into the world, and I'll make myself that I don't know what's going to happen. And I'll only find out about it after, when it takes place. So you're limiting Hashem. Hashem's changing himself. That's no good. So maybe you want to say then, let's say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the beginning was a God that does not know about the event beforehand, and he lacks knowledge of an event both before and after the event, meaning he didn't know anything before, and he'll only know after the whole thing takes place. That way Hashem doesn't have to change himself, meaning in the beginning, Hashem knew everything. And then he said, well, I have to create man. And man has to have free will. So, okay, I'm going to change I'm going to change myself. I'm now going to become the God who doesn't know beforehand what he does. So now God changed himself? That's not going to happen. So then what should we say? So God says, let's say the inception of God is, whatever that means, that God's beginning is that he never knew what you're going to do in the future, and therefore he never had to change himself. So he was just a God that was limited, and that's what he says. You didn't solve the problem at all. For this would imply that Hashem doesn't perceive human deeds and actions at all, and the entire structure of the Torah's promise of reward and punishment would be meaningless. That means Hashem doesn't really know. After the fact, he'll see what's going to he's going to see what's going to take place. Says Rav Tatz, you're running yourself into a wall any way that you look at it, and therefore leave it alone. Don't go with that opinion, because that opinion is going to be, it's too philosophical. It leaves too many holes in the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the existence of Hashem, and therefore that's why many argue on him and they depart from what the Ralbag says, as we're going to see coming up. We have another commentary, and that is Rav Kreskas. We'll see that next time, God willing. And little by little, we have to keep redefining how the free will is going to work. But what we're looking for is a common thread in all these opinions, meaning that it should be that the common thread that is going to reveal itself is there's a general idea of how Hashem's foreknowledge and free will is going to work. Each one of these mafarshim and these commentators is going to have maybe a nuance that's going to add into our understanding, but it's not going to change the basic fundamental idea that Hashem knows everything, and yet we have free will to choose whatever we'd like to do. So we'll leave it over here today. Monday, yes?
Can I ask a quick question about what we talked about a couple weeks ago in self-defense?
Yeah.
You had a case where